You are now tuned into Flipping the Birds, a Philly Sports Network podcast.
What's going on, Eagles fans? Welcome one, welcome all to another episode of Flipping the Birds.
He's into the end zone. Touchdown, Eagles.
What's going on, Eagles fans? Welcome one, welcome all to another episode of Flipping the Birds. I'm Brian Cameron alongside Eric Reese, Zach Chavalella, and we have made it. We are finally here, week 1 in the NFL. How you feeling, boys?
I mean, depending on how you like my predictions, you guys might be able to wait for week 2 even. No, I can't wait. I can't wait. Therefore, a lot of people are going to be like, Eric, pick the other team. Well, I don't know about that. We'll see, though. I'm not going to spoil it.
It worked last season. It worked a lot last season.
Apparently, it's worked every season that I've been on this show.
But also to kind of applaud Eric a little bit, like Eric did say this team was not as good as their record, and it caused a lot of chaotic conversation.
People didn't like that.
You were right.
They didn't like that. I didn't like it. But, I think it's more important to be right. Unfortunately, it's kind of our line of business. We don't want to, fluff an hour of just talking about who could be the best 83 when the wide receivers, in fact, wearing 13. So, there's that. We can tell you guys what you want to hear and all that stuff. And at the end of the day, it's just not what Flipping the Birds is all about.
That's fair. How you feeling, Zach?
I feel good. I'm back from the shore. Got the Birds on Friday. Feeling like a win. I feel pretty good.
That's fair.
Tomorrow's already Wednesday. Like, we're creeping up to it.
It's right there. It's just literally right around the corner.
Yeah.
And then make sure you guys also tune in Saturday morning. We'll be recapping the game. Whether the Eagles win or lose, we'll show up as we always do.
We might be the first on it because they can't have Twitter in Brazil. We might be the beats.
Fair point. Fair point.
So Philly and Green Bay, two teams that second part of the season last year were going in opposite directions. Jordan Love found his stride, started to take the Packers from middle of the pack team to an actual contender. Went in the playoffs, destroyed the Cowboys. And if I'm not mistaken, they got destroyed by the Niners the week after. Was it the Niners that took them out? Might be completely wrong in that regard. But Eagles started out 10-1, lost a good batch of the second half games. Offense fell apart completely, got to the playoffs, got eliminated by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers for the second time in Jalen Hurts' career. And we're here now. They start off week 1. They start off in Brazil. A lot of players are unhappy about it. How do you guys feel about the Eagles traveling to Brazil for a week 1 game and actually a game that's actually a home game for them?
I mean, aside from all the rhetoric of, they took, a home game from Philadelphia and who wants to have an NFL game in Brazil, I'm okay with it. I think raw talent and sloppy football in week 1, the Eagles are the better team. So I don't really think it matters where this game is played at. Green Bay, Philadelphia, Brazil, Mars, bring Pluto back and play it there. You can do wherever you want. Philadelphia, I think, it isn't going to be, are you going to feel a little bit lagged going into it? Probably. But at the same time, I don't think there's really any room for excuses. I think Philadelphia is ready to go. I think Green Bay is ready to go. I think Philadelphia, in my mind, hint, is going to be the better team. So I'm excited for it, but of course, it does take away a home game from Philadelphia. I know the Philadelphia fans will hate that.
Yeah, it takes away a home game. Looking at the schedule, I haven't double-checked this, but I'm assuming, considering that it's a 17-game schedule, that they still have 8-8 home and away, right? So, in that case, not that I'm particularly a fan of the direction the NFL is taking the game in terms of adding games, which as a fan I love, but thinking about these guys as people, I don't love them having to kill each other for another week. But with that being said, if you look at it through that perspective, are you truly losing that much more of an advantage, like from a fairness perspective? Because otherwise, you're talking about your schedule with, uh, 9 uh, home games and 8 away games, and there's other teams that have the opposite, and blah 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 blah. It's boring. Let's talk about football, right? So for me, that's what I'm focused on. I'm focused on the game at hand. I want to see Jalen Hurts against Jordan Love. These are two of the better young quarterbacks in the NFL. Two guys who I think that we're going to see some drastic improvements this year. So, for Jalen Hurts, people talked a lot about regression last year. I don't know that it was so much of regression because that kind of has like ability implications. I just think based on the constructs of the offense, how it was presented, and just the lack of situational mental toughness by the team last year, that just led to circumstances of lack of performance. So I say that all just to say that I don't think that he is lesser of a player after last year, but I do think he could continue to take a step forward this year as well. Part of the reason, which goes into why he was worse last year, is the change in offensive coordinator. But part of it beyond that is just his innate desire to get better each and every year. So I'm excited to see Jalen Hurts specifically, especially after last year. I'm excited to see that matchup against Jordan Love. We're looking at two of the historically best running backs over the past 5 years in the NFL who are now on new teams playing each other. Like it's not like a like a rivalry type storyline, but I think that's an underutilized, interesting storyline that no one's really brought up. But I'm also, obviously excited to see Saquon Barkley in Philadelphia, or rather, a Philadelphia uniform. But just looking at these two teams on paper, I'm not necessarily a believer that the Packers are a contender, but I think they have some interesting pieces. I think they're going to be an interesting team throughout the season, and I just feel pretty good about this game being a competitive, game back and forth between these two teams. I think it's going to be an offensive showing for sure. So I think it's going to be one that the fans are going to really love to see.
So speaking of the two quarterbacks, right? We saw Jordan Love take a bit of a leap, right? In his if I'm not mistaken, his first year actually starting. Started off kind of rough. Weapons, where I believe Christian Watson was injured for most of the year. It took him a while to find his footing, but when he did find his footing, he showed that he can actually be a game changer. And I think you hit the nail on the head where Jalen Hurts, a lot of people say that he regressed last year. I mean, it's hard to really progress when you're in an offense that's not doing anything. They expected their playmakers to make things happen out of nowhere, which Philadelphia has a bad how can I say this? It's like a bad juju with them when it comes to these kind of offensive play calling. Like there's always that one offensive coordinator or coach that thinks they know more than everybody and ends up calling these lackadaisical plays in hopes that their guys can actually just beat any defense that's put out there. But football is a game of chess, and at the end of the day, the Eagles were outplayed heavily towards the end of the last season. They had great moments. We saw Jalen Hurts ball out against the Buffalo Bills. We saw Jalen Hurts ball out against the Chiefs. He was able to prove to people that he was the MVP for almost, I think, like 13 weeks running. But now, we're here. We're in a new season. People are saying that they don't believe he's a top 10 quarterback. They don't believe that he's an elite quarterback. They don't believe he belongs in the same tier as a Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, and Patrick Mahomes. He has the weapons he needs to be successful this year. And what do you guys feel like what do you feel like needs to stand out in this game for you to be like, okay, like, hey, like they know what they're doing this season, as opposed to like shit like last year, Kenny Gainwell being the lead back in week 1 and then not seeing DeAndre Swift. Like, what do you feel like needs to happen for them to convince you like they actually know the direction that they need to go in?
I would like to see a little bit of comfort in Kellen Moore's offense, almost straight up out of the gate from Jalen Hurts, and I think it's very possible. I think it's overblown by a lot of people's standards, metrics, whatever you want to say. I think there's a lot of haters that will not put Jalen Hurts in that elite conversation. I do think that Jalen Hurts, and you can quote me on this, put it on your Buffalo Bills Mafia, I think that he's better than Josh Allen. I'm going to straight up say it, and you can feel how you want to feel about it. The fact of the matter is, last season, he still had a fantastic season when you had bland play calling. There were some times where you forgot straight up that you had DeAndre Swift in the backfield. and he had to rely on Jalen Hurts to go out there and keep the team competitive and win some games. The point I guess I'm trying to make here is when you go into this season, I'm expecting the world of Jalen Hurts. I'm expecting there be no question left behind that he's elite, because last year he still wasn't bad. And last year it almost defeated the purpose of even hiring an offensive coordinator, because it wasn't Brian Johnson. Come to find out, we took all last year to sit there and say Brian Johnson this, Brian Johnson that, Brian Johnson needs fired. It was Sirianni. So
whoa. So somebody on this podcast always said it was Sirianni. I'm just saying.
Yeah, you were right. You were right, because you were threading that needle, and I'm sitting over here going, it can't be Sirianni. It can't be this bad when it's your head coach. It was. So what you're looking for out of Jalen Hurts is comfort in Kellen Moore's system. And if he can get that almost out of the gate, I'm putting more money on the idea that Jalen Hurts is going to be in this era, this aura of elite. And you're going to see him stepping up into the same sort of conversation as guys like, Josh Allen. I think, you can already say even that Jalen Hurts is there, or even past him. I would like to see Jalen Hurts step into the conversation of Mahomes for sure. But I think Mahomes, you got to give credit where it's due. He kind of does play in a league of his own. Will his numbers take a drop because of a lack of receivers? Possibly. But it hasn't really stopped him before.
That's very fair.
I have to, first of all, agree just on the fact that Hurts is, I would say, underrated. And it's completely separate, but I had this conversation come up, of all places, at the Sixers practice facility, just talking to some of their Sixers beats, where somebody who is not from Philly, who covers the team, is not an Eagles fan, stated that Jalen Hurts was around the more, or one of the more overrated quarterbacks in the NFL. That's an overrated. What are you talking about, overrated? You look at this guy and what a lot of people have to say about him, and you look at some of the lists that come out every year, and you're talking about a guy who's consistently underrated, in my opinion. I mean, you talk about somebody who, I get his season last year in the proper context. You can't excuse things away. You can't wipe away last season, because you can do that for everyone for a variety of different reasons. But I think what you can definitively say is that Jalen Hurts is on paper better than he played last season. So, this year with what appears to be a more confident offensive coordinator, I think he's going to thrive. Now it's up to Hurts to actually prove that. It's more than just any type of regression that we were already talked about from last season. But this is a guy who I think is going to reestablish himself near the top. Eric, kind of like you said, in that Josh Allen territory. Now, I'm not ready to put him above Allen like you are, just myself personally. I do think Allen is a tad bit overrated by some. And when you look at it from a pure quarterback perspective, people love the gunslinger. Brian, you and I were talking about that, I feel like, a while ago, maybe a couple weeks ago. People love the Brett Favre type. That's where Josh Allen comes into play. That's why, certain people are already kind of falling in love with some of these new generation gunslingers. And Jalen Hurts is not that. Jalen Hurts is not as athletic a freak as like a Lamar Jackson is. So he's not, in that Vic Jackson tantalizing group in terms of using his legs. He's not in that Patrick Mahomes, Tom Brady, Drew Brees in terms of arm talent. So, people don't really have that one kind of definitive skill set to look at and say, oh, well, he's like the best at that. So I feel like that's why he gets slighted a little bit, because, he's a bit of that kind of jack of all trades. What we haven't seen last year was an ability to see him throw around the field, because obviously they weren't throwing over the middle hardly at all. They weren't running. And you talked about Sirianni. I don't care whose offense that really was,
right?
Whether it was Brian Johnson's, whether it was Nick Sirianni's.
I care, damn it. I care. Right. The people care.
I care too.
What I care about is never seeing it again, is my point, right? So that's my greater takeaway. So whoever the idiot behind it was, and yeah, the idiot behind it probably was Sirianni, but whoever it was, like, and I say it lovingly to my fellow Italian, but whatever. Like it obviously didn't work.
Wait, how do you say idiot lovingly?
It's a family thing. You got to understand, right?
Idiot.
You got to idiota. Yeah, you got to understand. So really, like, listen, he's not an X's and O's guy. We've known this, and I think he knows this deep down. I think he provides a certain sense of value as the head coach of this team, and I feel that opinion strongly, or more strongly than certain others, especially in the media around here. But I think that there is that use of that type of leader of men position. I think this is what Nick Sirianni provides. What I don't think he provides is an X's and O's specialist, right? He's not that type of game manager. And there's coaches who have done this and it's worked before, Mike Tomlin types, and I'm not saying Sirianni. There's obviously a lot of differences, but I think there's certain similarities at the same time. So all I'm getting at is that, if you have him act within his best suited role, I think you're going to be fine with Nick Sirianni. If you now, have released those offensive confines from Jalen Hurts, I think you're going to be, seeing a lot more of what we're used to seeing out of Jalen Hurts. And I think you're going to see him reestablish himself as a potential top 5 quarterback in the NFL. Now, we can talk about listing our top quarterbacks at some point, which I think during the season we may eventually get to.
Let's wait till halfway so we don't, it's not this way too early,
Exactly.
On. You're right. Yeah.
Exactly. And part of the reason I want to say, echo what Eric just said is that there's so many people who are already in love with, and granted, I love CJ Stroud. I think his game is fantastic. A lot of people crowning him a top 3 quarterback after one season. So, I'm just saying we got to watch, how that way too early stuff works. Yeah. So there's going to be a lot to watch across the league. You're watching how Joe Burrow bounces back, in his Marshall Mathers phase. And there's going to be a lot just across the entire league to see what's going on with these quarterbacks. So Jalen Hurts is a guy I think who can rise back up those lists. I think he's been underrated to this point. Again, I've already stated he's someone to watch for me in this game, but I think it's going to be a good season out of him, and this is where it all starts.
Speaking of quarterbacks, real quick, I drafted one as my backup. I don't understand it because it's Trevor Lawrence, and I just don't get it. He's like a science experiment, and it sometimes works, and sometimes doesn't. There it is, Trevor Lawrence, ladies and gentlemen.
Trevor Lawrence is like the Andrew Luck of mechanics, except that you just when does the car turn on? It just never connects. And it's I don't understand it. He's going to continue to get passes. I would say at least for the next 3 years, but he's much more potential than substance at this point.
I have an interesting question for you guys, and then we'll move on to keys to the game and players watching predictions. In your opinion, and I feel like he may have had this last year, has Jalen Hurts arrived yet? Has he had that moment where it's kind of like, I'm here, you can't deny me anymore? I thought it was possibly in the Super Bowl or even in the Buffalo game, but apparently it hasn't hit just yet.
I think he has, to answer your question. And I think that, every quarterback does have, most quarterbacks should just say, because it's too early to say about every quarterback, I should say. Take that going into account about what Zach just kind of, made a point about. But most quarterbacks, end up having a year where it's like, okay, that was their kind of like a slump even. Let's have a bounce back. Obviously for Jalen Hurts, that's not the fitting sophomore slump. But I think it's enough where it's like there is so much uncertainty on the table entering last year because of who and the what now is our coordinators. And did it even matter to have a coordinator? It didn't seem like anything was held tight. And this year you have that feeling where things are held tight. So yeah, I think Hurts has arrived. I think last year was slow, and I think this year there's going to be more emphasis on, hey, remember that time I arrived? Here I am again. Here I never really left even. So yeah, I do think he has arrived. I think it's astonishing how many people don't think he has arrived.
Yeah, it's a what have you done for me lately kind of league. We've seen that before. I mean, people don't remember it now just because he's been so stellar in recent memory, but there are a lot of people who doubted Lamar Jackson, even after his first MVP. It's ridiculous how you see people ebb and flow on these players. And,
right.
And, part of that is that, the NFL is such an unpredictable league in terms of, whether it's an injury or just general regression. That does happen, to be fair. But, At the same time, like you see these guys go through these waves. I think Jalen Hurts has had that moment. I think he lost the public confirmation of that moment based on how he played last season. But again, I think it's something that he can definitely recoup. And I think that this season is potentially the year to do that. What it's going to take is not only a strong performance throughout the regular season, but a strong performance in the postseason again. That's what's going to win people back over. And there's still going to be some detractors who say, oh, well, look what the talent around him. Like anyone could thrive in that system. And, yeah, there's an immense amount of talent around Jalen Hurts. So there's no excuses. But at the same time, you can, if you watch football, you can tell the guys who exceed in addition to having a stacked offense, as opposed to the guys who succeed because of their stacked offense.
So focusing on a little bit into the Packers Eagles game on Friday night. What are your keys to the game and the Eagles possibly pulling this off? What group do you feel like will truly stand out in this featured game? I'm gonna go on a limb and I'm gonna go for a stretch and say that the linebacker play is gonna be very, very detrimental. I think this is a moment where a Devin White, a Kobe Dean, a Jeremiah Trotter, even a Zach Bond can actually make their stamp onto the season and saying, like, I'm here, like, this is my position. I'm hoping it's Devin White just because he has that speed, that attack mentality that you need at linebacker. But what are your keys to the game for against the Packers?
It's forcing the pass. In other words, stopping the run. Jordan Davis is a key player that I'm watching this game because I need to see how he can stuff the line. And what help does he get with it? Because you brought up Zach Bond, and I've gone off the narrative of what I've started, pretty much during the preseason is Bond a placeholder? Is Bond a motivator to get, no N'Kobe Dean's engine moving? If he's not, then kind of putting everything on the line and taking down Josh Jacobs, and kind of halting him. That looks good for any linebacker. I don't care if you're a makeshift group, kind of like how Philadelphia has, but it's going to be a joint effort between that defensive line down the middle and the linebackers. So I'm going to go and say I have an idea what White can do. If Bond's going to be your starter, I'm looking at Bond, and I want to see a strong game from Jordan Davis. So Jordan Davis and Bond, yeah, my two guys on defense. I'm expecting the secondary to be competitive. So it's not as much of an emphasis there. So yeah, stopping the run to me absolutely is a key factor in this game.
I hate to sound kind of like a downer, and it doesn't necessarily affect my outlook on the entire game itself. I don't have particularly high expectations for the defense. Now, I can certainly be proven wrong. If that happens, I expect it to be really through Vic Fangio, who will attempt to frustrate Jordan Love with a lot of different situational pass rush looks. So in that scenario, I could see, again, myself being proven wrong, but I don't feel immensely competent or confident, I should say, in the team's defensive ability. More so, I think you're looking at kind of a shootout, which is where I think that these wide receivers are really going to stand out. Just that combination of A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Jahan Dotson, Britton Covey, who may even find himself on the field for some offensive snaps in addition to special teams. But I think that we're really going to see why not only this offense is going to be one of the top 3 in the NFL this season, but on top of that, why this is the top receiving core in the NFL.
That's fair. I feel like we all kind of just focused on the curiosity that's surrounding the defense at this moment. There's a lot of and ifs and buts, but it's just it's going to be interesting to see. I do agree with Zach in the offense. It's one of those things where it's kind of like there's no way this offense doesn't boom. Like if this offense busts, it's got to be something internally infecting this offense. From the coaching, from the players, like they had the morale to be completely off for this offense not to boom. Players to watch. I'm gonna make the most obvious statement. Saquon Barkley is the player to watch. I am excited. I'm looking forward to seeing 2-6 back there and doing what he did in New York, but at a more efficient rate in Philadelphia because of the offensive line, because of the playmakers, because of the quarterback. I I don't want to say I'm expecting huge things out of Saquon Barkley in week 1, but I'm expecting to see the difference that he can make in this offense. We saw DeAndre Swift pop off a lot of big runs in crucial moments last year. We saw them get creative with the screen game with DeAndre Swift. I expect to see something of that sort with Saquon. I also expect to see Saquon actually get more than 15 carries in the game. Like I want to see this team become a heavy in the run. Like I want to see them commit to the run for the first time, and I want to avoid Philadelphia crying for them to run the ball come week 3 because it happens every year. It's got to stop. We know that Philadelphia loves to get gritty. We love to see the players. We love to see the running backs do the things that they can do best. And Saquon Barkley signed a heavy contract to show that to come here and show what he can do best.
Yeah, one thing that you don't want to see too much of, or at least repeating, is the screen passes. Like, okay, I like to see one tastefully. If it makes sense, do it. If it's
You should
2
play a
or
drinking
3
game for the screen passes on Flipping the
Dude,
Birds.
I will be too hammered. If it was anything like last year, I will be inebriated. I won't even be able to say inebriated.
So I mean, the thing go ahead, Eric.
I'll just end it on this. I guess for my player to watch here, even more obvious than you is going to be Jalen Hurts. And it has everything to do with kind of what I touched on earlier. How comfortable does he look just starting this season? And I think it will only get better in Kellen Moore's system. And dare I even branch off to another offensive guy, and it's going to be someone less obvious, Dotson. You made a move to get a wide receiver, and if we kind of know what it is already with Smith and Brown, let's see what Dotson does to get open those guys up. Between Hurts and Dotson, I think that'll be an interesting mix. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's the backbreakers to Green Bay, but an interesting mix nonetheless.
I like that.
I definitely agree. It's an interesting mix. As far as the screen passes go, I think that we're still going to see a fair amount of screens. However, a screen pass properly executed is completely different than anything that we saw last season, right? The tight end screen, I don't think is going away at all. I think that's still going to be an option for Philadelphia because they have such dynamic weapons at effectively all 3 starting receiver spots. You're going to have that option with Dallas Goedert because you have a dynamic running back in Saquon Barkley. You still have that option in Dallas Goedert. Now, what I don't necessarily want to see is if the defense is in press coverage, you still running a wide receiver screen, which part of that's identification on Jalen Hurts' part. Of course, is that the relationship between Sirianni and maintaining those plays last season? Who quite knows? But it's going to need a lot of awareness on Jalen Hurts' part. It's going to need a lot of flow on the part of the Eagles' new offensive coordinator and Kellen Moore. And, with those things considered, I think that you could be looking at wide receiver screens being reintroduced into the Philadelphia offense in a fresh way, right? So I think it's still going to be a part of the game for Philadelphia. I just don't think it's going to be as stale as it's been before. But they ran it into the ground last year, so I can understand kind of looking at it. And it's like when you eat too much of like a certain, whatever you love. Doesn't matter how much you love it when it's at its best. If you had too much macaroni and cheese, you have too much whatever. Like as you do eventually reach a certain point where you can't look at it the same way, and you just need a long break from it. So I totally get that in terms of screens. I do think that we are going to continue to see them. We're going to see a new variety, not necessarily new, but I should say a wider variety than we saw last season. And I think they're going to be executed a lot better, which is the crucial fact.
I think you have the playmakers to execute that. Like you have a Jahan Dotson that's not going to be like Quez Watkins running towards the defender. You have a Saquon Barkley who physically is a lot betterly built than DeAndre Swift or Miles Sanders. So I do agree with you. And I think it wouldn't be frowned upon if they did a screen games. It would be frowned upon if they did it excessively, like you mentioned. Shout out to Jay Fizz for joining us tonight. But Fizz does have a question. Do we see John Dotson as a Nelson Aguilar of this year's team? That's pretty interesting outlook, being that he's fresh to this team, slot receiver role. Do you see him standing out and making an Aguilar like plays like Aguilar did with Jeffrey and Torrey Smith here?
You muted Eric.
He's throwing out some biblical stuff over there.
I know he's really feeling it. He's in the vibe.
Yeah, he's in it. So in it, can't find the unmute button.
All right. So while he's looking for that unmute button, I'll just go ahead and I'll speak first. Oh, there goes Eric. Okay. I don't know what happened there, but with Dotson, I think you can look at him in the slot and say that's a sensible fit, right? He played in the slot at Penn State, so that comes that clear connection there. Did play a lot on the outside for Washington. I would say almost exclusively on the outside, if I remember correctly, for Washington. So I think you're going to be looking at it a little bit both ways. Philadelphia is going to want to rotate those wide receivers through that slot. You have so many slot capable players, whether that is, Dallas Goedert, or more specifically to this point, AJ Brown is a star in the slot. Devontae Smith is a star in the slot. So I think you're going to be looking at, really kind of a maybe not a fixed rotation, but a lot of flexibility into who plays in that slot. And so I think that's where you can actually make that connection between Dotson and Nelson Aguilar, where you're looking at a guy who is a little bit positional versatile in terms of slotting on the outside. I think he's going to have better hands. I'm hoping, praying he's going to have better hands than Aguilar. However, Aguilar did have good hands when it counted, at least in the biggest games. So, I think you're looking at a guy who is, if he provides similarly to what Aguilar did, I think you call that a success. Just hopefully those lows are not quite that low, and I feel like they won't be.
Yeah, I mean, I just caught the last of what Zach said, and it feels like something along the lines of what I was going to say. So,
relay that for you, buddy.
Yeah, no, thank you for literally nailing that. It sounds. I don't think that the bad ends of what we had with Aguilar is going to compare with Dotson. I think Dotson is a better receiver. I think we're going to see, if I can make a comparison between the two, I think we're going to see more of like the good Aguilar, like the 2017, 18 Aguilar, and then we're not going to see the Aguilar like, whatever else, because if that does happen, it'll be very easy just to implement Britton Covey in there. Thanks, Tim. So yeah, I think we have a 3 where it can be a 4 switched out, where it's like, hey, if you're not the hot hand, I'll find a hot hand. And then you also have 2 tight ends that you can more than anything kind of, navigate your passes with as well. Not everything has to go to the wide receivers. So if Dotson's not having a fine game, and if Britton Covey's not, create the separation, it's not necessarily the end of the world. But in comparison, going back to Jay Fizzle, I do think that Dotson will be a touch better than what we've come to realize out of Aguilar. Now, Aguilar being in Baltimore and him dropping as many balls as he does now, I absolutely think that Dawson's going to be better.
And then we have another question from Tim. Do you guys think that that Smith moves more to the CeeDee Lamb role and they let Dotson run the deep routes on the outside? And I think that kind of hit the nail on the head, where it's kind of like they'll be, every single wide receiver is going to be interchangeable in this offense. You're going to see AJ Brown in the slot if the advantage is there. You'll see Devontae Smith in the slot if the advantage is there. I feel like you'll see even Saquon and Dallas Goedert in the slot if the advantage is there. With the playmakers that they have, I mean, they can get really, really freaky. Best way to put it. Like, they could get really freaky with this offense.
I want Brown to run some slants, as many slants as he wants, quite frankly. That would be my favorite.
Yeah, I think you can be looking at a lot of the guys running slants out of the slot. One quick note on what Doug says about me cheating off Eric's homework. Little known fact, Eric puts all his thoughts before the show into a docs file. He does not understand that I have the login to it. So that's how I was able to perfectly articulate his point on the Eagles offense.
The ironic part about that is that I'm an IT guy, so I don't understand it. It's in the cloud.
But one more thing, just on Tim's point question about Smith moving into that kind of CeeDee Lamb role. I don't think that that's going to be the look for him, just because when you look at CeeDee Lamb and Smith, bodily, these are two completely different guys, right? So what CD does, I think, is truly unique. I don't think there's another guy in the slot like Lamb right now in the league who runs it specifically like him. If you wanted to kind of pigeonhole a guy on the Eagles offense into that type of role, I think that's AJ Brown. But at the same time, the difference with Brown, he's way too valuable on the outside in order to do something like that with. And that's why I think they're going to have that kind of versatile rotation of these guys in the slot. And the benefit of that as well, which this is a benefit that Dallas doesn't have, considering they're built around one receiver, you have that optionality. We all know how much Philadelphia loves their optionality. So to be able to do that, keep defenses guessing, kind of like how Vic Fangio is going to try and keep quarterbacks guessing with the pass rush. I think you're going to be, effectively trying to keep guys guessing based on where they line up as well.
I'm surprised that we haven't talked about the pass rush yet. I mean, I'm still losing sleep over this just because I'm concerned of how this pass rush is actually going to look in the hands of Josh Sweat, Nolan Smith, Bryce Huff, Brandon Graham. I feel like we know what to expect him. The guy's going to somehow, some way, in year 15 is going to end up being probably the best pass rusher we have on this team at the end of the season.
Dang father time, dude. He always has something left in the gas tank.
I'm expecting no less than 20 sacks out of Brandon Graham. That's my
yeah, no less than 30 sacks, dude. I heard you.
Did you guys see the video of him just trash talking? Like the Eagles had to pick the best trash talker, and you just hear him yelling at every single opponent in the offense.
Yeah. Here's the deal. People talk about Big Dom, calming down Sirianni. Fletcher Cox, that was his job with Brandon Graham, was keeping him calm throughout the season. So, you really wonder who's going to step up in that role. You're talking about guys who are going to have to step up to a leader in that position. I don't know how many guys on that defense can do that. That's not really Josh Sweat's personality. There's not really anyone else who's really established. The guy who you say, oh, that's next man up, Jalen Carter. Jalen Carter's in his second year. So it's going to be really interesting to see. And who knows? Maybe, no one kind of keeps Graham in check and BG's able to kind of go off. And maybe that leads to the most productive season we've seen out of BG in a little bit, which I think all considered, he's been really good for Philadelphia. But I'm just saying, maybe that talk will get in the heads of some offensive players and get into that next level.
I think one of the big things when we bring up the pass rush, Joe, is we have to understand as fans of the Philadelphia Eagles that sacks is not a stat that you should be pretty much like providing a baseline of Jordan Davis's season.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's a run stopper. He clogs the middle. If he can clog the middle and have that offense and help that offensive line collapse and create pressure, that's what you're looking for. QB pressures, it will be a stat for a particular player, but you should watch how that develops, and that will give you all you need to know on a passing play from a guy like Jordan Davis. I see a lot of people who've been saying, and this was where it comes from, that Jordan Davis needs to have more sacks this year. No, he doesn't. No, he doesn't. He just needs to stop runs. He needs to stop runs and needs to be accommodated by those linebackers. If we get that, then we have exactly what we asked for.
I would like to see him generate some kind of pressure. I think it's more pressure than sacks that you need to see out of Jordan Davis. I remember there being a controversy. I think it was specifically around Fletcher Cox, around how he was creating hurries. He had QB hits, but he wasn't necessarily generating sacks. That's the kind of stuff that I want to see Jordan Davis kind of doing.
Right.
With that being said, I think you're 1,000% correct when you say that the biggest focus has to be stopping the run for him. The Philadelphia Eagles were terrible at stopping the run last season. The linebackers have supposedly improved. It's going to be a lot of that weight on them to stop the run, but it all starts with Jordan Davis, right? So if they're going to have that successful season in stopping the run, and if they're going to be able to help out, because the pass rush isn't looking like it's going to be an elite pass rush this season. If they're going to help out those defensive backs and everyone playing behind that defensive line, they're going to have to stop that run attack up front.
And I think you hit it right there where the pressures have to be there. Like I could care less about, them coming home and getting the sack. Like, yes, in crucial times, it will be great. Like the Hassan Reddick sacks in the fourth quarter, causing a fumble. That's all great. But pressuring a guy like Jordan Love, pressuring the quarterbacks you're going to face this year is more key than anything, because it buys the defensive backs enough time to analyze things and to actually make a play. Like, I'd rather have our defense collect more interceptions than sacks this season, just because it shows that, we're keeping quarterbacks in check, as opposed to allowing quarterbacks to just go for 500 yards, 3 touchdowns, and somehow, some way we win the game. But I feel like if Jordan Davis can make that step where he's a great run blocker, but as well, just causing the amount of pressures that you need to cause. He's a big boy, man. This guy should be clogging up the middle and making lanes for Jalen Carter, for Nolan Smith, for Josh Sweat. They should be eating because of the lanes that the double teams that he's causing, the lanes that he's clogging. They should be able to to come home and get the sacks and get the stats that they need to be successful in their own right.
Now, how do we feel about the Packers passing attack, I should say? Do you think that, they're a threat to take the Philadelphia long? Because that's kind of not what I feel. I think they're more of a threat to move the ball on short yardage throws and kind of move the chains that way, the yards after the catch. However, and I go back to my saving grace for my fantasy team last year, I look at a guy like, where is he at? Jaden Reed, man. Like, Jaden Reed's somebody who can surprise. But I do think that at the end of the day, Philadelphia will be eliminating the big plays in the air.
I feel like you don't know what to expect from this pass attack. Like,
you're right,
Christian Watson, that's a big boy with great speed, and he just figured out how to stop injuring his hamstring. So he's down. He's destined for a bounce back season this year, right? Jaden Reed is, people are saying that he's wide receiver 1 in Green Bay. Like, they're expecting big things. Dobbs. He's not a scrub. Like, the kid can play. When they need him to be the number 1 target, he's the number 1 target. But
he's listed as questionable right now.
Oh,
and actually, for us too, I was going to bring this up earlier. Goddard's starting as questionable. Maybe you guys have a little bit more information about that than I do, because I just sort of looked it up before we came on. But I will say this: is this a game where we're starting in Brazil with Greg Calcaterra?
No, so Goddard said that he's good to go. That he's on. Okay. He's prepared. I think it was something with his oblique or something of that sort. But he said he's good to go. Isaiah Rodgers did show up on the injury report as well with a hand injury, which I feel like they've kept under wraps very, very well. AJ Brown rest.
They haven't. So that they've matched the injury well. There's been a lot of puffing up Keon Mitchell ahead of this game. Specifically, the idea that he's going to be on the field a lot.
I shouldn't put 2 and 2 together where it was like Isaiah Rodgers was paying the price for it. But that makes a lot of sense now. Like, I mean, I get the hype behind Isaiah Rodgers, and I would love to see him, ball out. But I want to see our first round pick eat up as many snaps as he possibly can, because he was a first round pick for a reason. I know Cooper's gonna be, taking his time coming back, but then you have Keely Ringo, who you want him to eat up as many snaps as possible, because he was a high pick last year for a reason as well. Like,
I would imagine you're probably going to see a lot of Avonte back in the slot. I think that when you're looking at these safeties, obviously CJ is going to get the start. In addition to that, I think it's Blankenship who's set to start alongside CJ.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Blankenship, and then you'll get your fixture of Maddox in there as well.
Yeah, and Brown's on a
I imagine there's going to be some type of rotation, just on the fact that there's normal rotations in NFL games. Like, guys aren't always running every single play, obviously. So you're going to have times where I think you will be looking at Keon in the slot. In those cases, Ringo's probably going to be on the outside. So there is going to be somewhat of a rotation. You are going to see some snaps. And I hope that's the case, because they are going to need to keep these guys fresh. I do hope that, like Eric said, they do kind of hold the Packers to a bit more of a, not necessarily, dink and dunk. That's not exactly what Eric was saying, but less of an aerial attack. However, last season, the Packers were a top 10 team in passes, or receptions rather, over 30 yards. Yeah. So with that being said, like, it's a threat. It's just making sure that it's nothing more than just a threat. And with Christian Watson, I mean, who knows? That's I think the biggest question mark for the Packers offense. You're looking at guys like Romeo Dubes, who really kind of, or Dubes, whatever you laid on that. I completely missed that.
It's spelled like Dubes, but I've heard Dobbs, so I'm going to go Dobbs.
Yeah, we'll go with Dobbs. So with Greg Dobbs, out there as receiver for the Green Bay Packers, this is still a guy who can play. Like, it's no one that you can necessarily take lightly. So, for Philadelphia, it's going to be, again, about the pass rush and the run stuffing ability up front. But on top of that, you're going to need to get these corners rotated. That way they can, I mean, Slay's not going to rotate, but outside of that, you're going to need to get these corners rotated so they can stay fresh.
Now, I will say this. You get the Rasheed Walker really quick in this game. You know who's backing up Rasheed Walker? Andre Dillard. Let's get Andre Dillard in this game ASAP and see what's up, dude.
Let's see what's up.
Now, is he fully transitioned to the right side of the line, or did that end up not working?
He's second. Yeah.
Yeah, remember what he said. It's not possible in Dillard's mind to move to right tackle.
I don't care where he lines up. wherever that is, if he does play, you're putting Brandon Graham right on that guy because my goodness, the things that he can
Oh,
say.
that sounds fun. I like that. That sounds a lot of fun.
Speaking of a lot of fun, this is the segment that has grown infamously well throughout our tenure with Zach and Eric on the show.
Terrifyingly fantastic. Like,
It's prediction time, Eric.
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
It's back.
it
It's
is.
here.
It
It's
is, it
fresh.
is. You know, like I'm supposed to say the Eagles lose. Sorry, guys, the Eagles don't lose. So here's how this goes. I think it's going to be a close game. I think it has all the opportunity to be a sloppy first game on some fronts, and maybe that's what keeps Green Bay in it. However, I will stretch it out to a 7-point ball game from Philadelphia. So 24-17, I think makes about right. For a week 1 win. 1-0 Birds. That's how I got it. 14-3 on the year. 1-0 Birds.
Okay, how you feeling?
And Brazil flag. Put it there.
sorry about that. I'm feeling pretty confident for the Eagles. Not that it's necessarily going to be a blowout, but more so that you're going to be looking at a relatively high scoring situation. More importantly, Eagles win, right? So over the past 9 seasons, the Eagles have not scored below 17 points in the opening game. They've only scored below 24 points twice, right? A lot of these games with this scoring is you're talking over 30 points. I think that's what we're looking at in this game. Just not only is this the best offensive grouping the Eagles potentially have ever had, right? And that includes the Chip Kelly, the infamous entry Chip Kelly year, the 27-2, which was great and fantastic. A large part of that was the league not adjusting. I think when you look at the talent of this team, this is the best offensive group that they have ever had. So with that being said, I think offense is the name of the game. Looking at Green Bay, I think offense again is the name of the game. I think that they're going to be able to take advantage of certain things against this Philadelphia defense. So it's going to be a close game, but I do feel like Philadelphia ultimately pulls it out. I'm going to say it's going to be 31-27 Philadelphia.
Okay. I do think it'll be a sloppy game because the offense hasn't played a preseason snap. I do think it'll be an interesting defensive game, holding down both offenses. I'm gonna go 27-26 Philly, and I think the Eagles edge them out because they play ground and pound. Like they rely on Saquon in the second half. They actually commit to the run, and we see a different, more mature offense than we seen last year. I feel like last year was the adolescence. What?
If they commit to the run, you're going to have Big Dom just carrying Nick Sirianni back to the flight. Wherever on location in Brazil, he's going to have to be hauled.
30+ million to their running back. They got to commit to the run.
Yeah, well, Swift and all the other ones that came before.
Yeah.
Speaking of committing to the run, the one question that I want to know ahead of the game, what is the over-under on pushes that we see during this game? Is that a part of the offense still? Is that no longer? And, if so, are they still putting Jalen Hurts in the way then, or are they going to run a wildcat push? What are we looking at in that situation?
I think you get creative now, and I still think we see the tush push because we saw it with Tanner McKee and Kenny Pickett in the preseason, so it's still around. But I think they get creative with Saquon back.
I mean, that looks what's usually pushed out of a tush as opposed to a proper tush push. But yeah, I get what you're saying. Eric, yes, you may continue.
I was looking up some props for the game as well. It's only a 2.5 point spread, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, on neutral ground, you're looking at two, I think, relatively high-powered offenses. A big question is, what does Josh Jacobs look like? A running back at his age on a new team. And I know you can say everything I'm saying now about Saquon Barkley, but it's going to be curious to see how he performs. And that's why I think, again, still stopping that run is going to be a key factor for Philadelphia. You can't let Josh Jacobs get going. I would say he's the most established offensive player on that Packers team. So if you're able to bottle him up in any sort of way, even if it's still a high-scoring game, I think the Philadelphia's going to come out on the right side of this.
It looks like the threshold for Jacobs is around 70 yards rushing. Because that's where it's 60 plus yards. He got minus 135, 70 plus. He got plus 125. So that looks like there's the threshold there. Saquon Barkley, yeah, just about the same. So I guess it's a safe bet for week 1 on both ends. 70 yards rushing for both on both ends. But for Jalen, I guess they're expecting around like 40 yards. So, if Jordan Love gets 25 yards, that's a plus 650 payout. And that's all rushing. So, on the ground, I'm expecting Philadelphia to kind of just, control the time of possession. And I think, in a game that we're all kind of saying that is going to be close, it's going to be a huge point to winning the game.
I would say, looking at those numbers that you just laid out for Josh Jacobs, and I just heard that I was watching the Kobayashi.
Was that on Netflix now?
Yeah, it came out yesterday. I think I was watching the hot dog contest.
Yeah, I want to watch that.
Just as who's that one? And I know the irony of me calling this dude Big Head, but that one comedian, the POW Catalina Winemaker guy.
Rob Riggle. Yeah.
Rob Riggle. Yeah. So Rob Riggle obviously doing hosting duties, because who else was going to do that for this hot dog eating competition? Rob Riggle doing hosting duties, making his pregame pick. He said, "My heart says blank, my money says blank." That's how I kind of feel with this. If we're talking about this betting selection, my heart says Philadelphia is able to bottle them up, and they're able to keep Josh Jacobs under that number. My money is going to say that he's going to go over in terms of yards. So that's going to be the one thing I hope Philadelphia proves me wrong, but I think that's a real threat to watch for this Eagles team.
If they can hold Josh Jacobs under 70 yards rushing in week 1, is that a good Philadelphia rush defense, or just a bad start for Josh Jacobs, and or maybe bad news coming where it's like, hey, you guys don't have a push on the run from your offensive line? Because again, I still view this Green Bay Packers team as a quote unquote rebuild team.
I feel like
I would say that.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Brian.
Rock, paper, scissors.
No.
I feel like they
have people watching the show. We can't pause the content to play rock, paper, scissors. You want to play a game of Smash Brothers? You want to?
What are you doing?
Should we set up the Xbox? All right, so Eric is scissoring himself live on camera.
Got a scissor, dude.
I feel like this Packers team called lightning in a bottle towards the second half of the season. Not to say that they're a bad team, not to say they're a rebuilding team. I think they're a middle of the pack team that a lot of people have high expectations for, because a lot of people saw the swagger that Jordan Love played with last year. But to go back early in the podcast when Zach mentioned CJ Stroud, the tape is out. There's film on Jordan Love. There's film on CJ Stroud. These guys are not going to get the same opportunities that they got last year against anybody. I mean, possibly against Dallas, because that was such a beautiful game by Jordan Love and the Packers against the Cowboys. But again, the tape is out. I feel like Jordan Love is. I don't want to say he's going to struggle, but he's going to reality's going to hit him where it's like, hey, this is the NFL. This is the pros. Like, this is a tough league. Nothing's going to be easy for you guys. I still think they win the division, to be honest. But I think they'll have a rougher road to get there. I don't think they're a rebuilding team, but if the Eagles are able to hold Josh Jacobs to under 70 yards, to answer your question, I think it's week 1. I think it's fine. It's trying to get your legs underneath you. You're trying to get the rust off, from the preseason, for training camp, and you're just first game jitters. But if the Eagles are able to hold them under 70 yards, it's it could be a testament to the defense, right? But it's too early to tell, especially in Philly.
Yeah, and that's kind of especially with the early bye week, right? Like having that early bye week, you wish it was a little bit later, because you're going to have it's week 4, right? Bye week. So you're going to have 3 games, and then you're going to have a cushion to kind of relax on. Hopefully that,
I think it's week 5 actually.
Is it week 5? Okay, so you have 4
Yeah.
games, and then you have a cushion a week on the chill on. Then in week 6 you come back in. I wouldn't say that you know too much about the team until you've played 5 games. So it's going to be the game after the bye week, and then at that you could still say, well, they had their bye week, they're coming off rest, right?
Mhm.
Like, could you say that? So yeah, you might not really have a honest gauge of the Philadelphia Eagles this season until week 6 or 7.
That's true.
I'm looking at this depth chart here, and anyone notice the starting middle linebacker for the Green Bay Packers?
No.
One former Eagle, Eric Wilson. So while the Packers do have some pretty strong players defensively, talking about Jair Alexander, talking about Kenny Clark, Rashawn Gary, there's some weaknesses defensively for this team. All right. So I think you're looking at a guy like Eric Wilson. I think you're looking at a guy like Quay Walker. I hate to say it, but some of these Georgia guys, Eric Stokes, somebody who I think hopefully you can see that the Eagles kind of go at least as opposed to Jair Alexander. I'm feeling pretty confident in this team's performance offensively come Friday.
That's fair. That's very fair. I mean, talking about weak middle linebackers. I mean, that screams Saquon all day. That screams
All day.
John Dotson eating in the middle of the field. Dallas Goedert eating in the middle of the field. Again, I feel like you'll see the maturity if they're able to strategically beat the Packers. I feel like you'll see the growth in what came with Kellen Moore. I pray to God that Nick Sirianni doesn't put his foot in his mouth and try to override anything that Kellen Moore does, which again is uncontrollable from our standpoint as fans. But I'm hoping that there is a fine line and thrown in the sand where Sirianni has to understand, like, hands off, dude. Eagles were 2-5 when you called the plays. The Eagles struggled last season when you called the plays. Come on, hands off. Let it be.
The only thing I want to see from Sirianni is him controlling relationships he has with the players in that locker room. Outside of that, let Fangio and let Moore do the things that your coordinators had not a chance to do last year. And, well, only offensive coordinator, because, hey, going back to now and knowing what we know now, I'm less opposed to blame Brian Johnson for much of anything. It will be interesting, by the way, completely off center from this game, to see how Brian Johnson goes about his time of coaching this season and to see what he has, what about him. But with our defensive coordinators from last year, I mean, dude, might as well had none. It was atrocious. It was embarrassing. So for this year to have the coordinators that you have and then to still have the idea that you want to overstep, get out. Let's get out.
Mm-hmm.
Get Big Dom that puts you on the first flight back to Brazil on site, whatever you need to do. Just learn in Brazil before you come back to the States. At least we can't tweet about it, I guess.
That's fair. So we all have the Eagles winning.
We're allowed to tweet about it. Like,
yeah, we are.
Oh yeah, I'll be tweeting about it. McLean and other guys will not be. I'll tweet. Follow me. I'll tweet.
No regular Eagles beats covering the game on Twitter, so be sure to follow Eric Reese FN in order to get your Eagles coverage during the game.
Sirianni has left onto the plane, I think. I cannot confirm. I'm not in Brazil. Send tweet.
Per a local source in Brazil.
Per me on my couch with this beer. He is gone. What is all right, so I guess now
Jay Fitz asked if we're doing a watch along. I want to say that Liam is possibly doing one. I have not heard from the grapevine yet. So definitely keep a lookout on that. Usually Liam does his podcast on Friday, so I would expect nothing less. Yep, Doug, I think he's got to do it. I mean, you guys are pressuring him to do it right now if he's watching it, which he most likely will watch the rerun.
It makes all
I can't wait to hear him call live when we see Christ the Redeemer statue come to life and beat the living snot out of everybody, just like he did on The Simpsons. I can't wait to see that. That's my expectation for Friday's game, is because The Simpsons are right about everything, and this is now their chance to be right about yet another thing. So.
If you're not following Liam, also follow him because he'll be tweeting all of your like Aeneas Smith like as running the ball into the end zone takes. Because also like me, we will not be in Brazil.
Oh God. So yeah, on that note, we'll see you guys Saturday morning. Maybe some of us will see you Friday night. I hope you guys enjoy the game. Week 1 is back. Thank you all for riding with us throughout this off season and for all the last season you've ridden with us. I mean, since 2019 we've been going. This is what I guess year 5 at this point. So we greatly appreciate you guys. And until Saturday morning, it's Brian Cameron alongside Eric Reed, Zach Chavalella, and we're flipping the birds.
Go Birds!
Yes, sir.
Flipping the birds. Flipping the birds. Flipping the birds.